A lone rancher rides the desert's edge, but beneath one cottonwood, a girl hangs with a sign of vengeance. The sun of New Mexico beat down like a hammer, merciless and unblinking. Calder Wyatt rode steady, dust curling up behind his horse with each tired step. He had been tracking a stray steer since morning, the trail growing faint in the cracked earth. The silence out here suited him, wind whispering low, leather creaking, a hawk's distant cry cutting through the emptiness. Calder liked things predictable, the land giving him no more than it took. But then he heard it. Faint, almost a trick of the wind, a breath broken in half, a sound that didn't belong. His hands stilled on the reins. He tilted his head, listening. Again it came, weak and jagged, like a thread pulled too tight. He slid from the saddle, tied his horse to a dead limb, and moved forward with quiet steps, rifle on his back. Through a stand of cottonwoods, he found her. A girl, hanging by the wrists, arms stretched above, body limp but alive. Her skin sun-dark, her hair matted with dust and blood, her breaths shallow, cracked lips moving without words. And above her, nailed into the tree, a crude wooden sign painted in thick red strokes. "White man, don't forgive." Calder's throat tightened. The words felt less like paint and more like a curse. He scanned the ridges, the rocks, nothing moved but the wind. He swallowed hard, bile burning. The desert was no longer silent. It was accusing. Still, he stepped forward. Calder's boots sank into the dry dust as he closed the space between himself and the girl. Up close, the sight hollowed him out, her wrists torn raw by the rope, her ankles swollen, her body swaying with each faint breath, like she might slip away at any moment. "Christ," he muttered under his breath. Her head lolled forward, dark hair veiling her face. A faint sound escaped her lips, more like a groan than a word. Calder's jaw tightened. Whoever had tied her up hadn't done it in haste. The rope was old mesquite fiber, twisted harsh, meant not just to bind but to punish. He could see the cruel thought in every knot. His hand went to the knife on his belt. He hesitated. That sign loomed above her, its painted words screaming louder than the silence around them. "White man, don't forgive." He felt its weight, like a judge's gavel. It wasn't just a warning. It was meant to brand him guilty before he ever acted. The girl stirred again, a whimper dragging him back from his thoughts. Calder gritted his teeth, stepped closer, and pressed the blade against the rope. "Hang all of them," he whispered, the words torn out of his chest. "I ain't that." One slice, and the rope snapped. She fell forward, but Calder caught her in his arms before the earth could. She was light, too light, like her bones had melted away. Her heat startled him. Her skin burned with fever, her body trembling against him. "Easy," he murmured, lowering her gently to the ground. From his canteen, he poured water onto a cloth and touched it to her cracked lips. Her eyes fluttered, half open, dark, unfocused, frightened. Her hand, weak as a leaf, clutched his sleeve. "You're safe now," he whispered, though the words felt heavy with doubt. He glanced at the sign one last time, its letters glaring back at him in the desert light. Then he pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You got a name?" he asked softly. No answer, only the slow rise and fall of breath. "Then we'll find one," he muttered. He lifted her into his arms. "But for now, you're with me." By the time Calder reached his ranch, the sun was dipping low, bleeding gold across the ridges. The place was no palace, just a one-room cabin, with a sagging barn and a windmill that groaned with every turn. But it was sturdy, and more honest than most men he'd known. He swung down from the saddle, cradling the girl against his chest. She barely stirred, her fevered head pressed to him as though every breath might be her last. He carried her inside, ducking beneath the low frame, and laid her gently upon his cot. For a long moment he stood there, staring down at her. She looked out of place against the clean blanket, like a storm-worn branch washed ashore. The lantern's glow danced across her face, cheeks hollow, lips cracked, lashes clotted with grit. Calder's chest tightened. He fetched a basin, filled it with water, and knelt by her side. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he muttered, more to break the silence than anything else. He dipped the cloth, wrung it out, and began to wipe the dust and blood from her skin. She flinched at first, a sharp intake of breath. Calder paused, waited, his hands steady despite the hammer in his chest. When she didn't pull away, he worked slow, gentle, as though he were touching something sacred. The water turned brown and red as it slid from her skin, but he kept going, washing her wrists, binding the burns with strips of soft cloth. Her eyes opened once, dark and distant, and lingered on him. Not trust something older than that. A wariness, sharpened by too much pain. "You remind me of a river I knew," Calder said quietly, almost to himself. "Dry most the year, looked dead. But come the rains, it ran fast, strong. Folk called it Quiet Snake. Didn't look like much, but it carried life when it chose to." The girl blinked once, slow and unreadable. "I'll call you Lena," he said at last. "Least for now." He tucked the blanket around her shoulders, then dragged his bedroll to the door. "I'll sleep in the barn, give you space." Before stepping outside, he looked back once. She hadn't moved, but her lips no longer trembled. 3 mornings passed. The desert carried on in its rhythm, wind scouring the rocks, coyotes howling at night, the silence between sunrises stretching long and thin. Inside the cabin, the girl Lena, as Calder called her, ate sparingly, moved little, and spoke not at all. But her eyes followed him when she thought he wasn't looking. On the 4th morning, Calder spotted something that froze his gut. A footprint pressed into the hard-packed dirt near the barn, smaller than his, fresher than his, angled toward the ranch. He crouched, tracing the heel with 2 fingers. Not a settler's boot, military issue, cavalry, and recent. He straightened slowly, scanning the ridgeline, the sagebrush, the shimmer of heat. Nothing moved, but the print told its own story. Company was coming. By noon, dust curled up from the east. A chestnut horse crested the rise, rider sharp in the blue and gold of the U.S. cavalry. Calder stepped onto the porch, rifle leaning against the frame but his hands empty. The man dismounted, tall and wiry, jaw shadowed with stubble. "You Calder Wyatt?" the soldier asked, voice flat. "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." He pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket and held it out. "You seen this one?" Calder took it. The sketch was crude, but the sharp eyes and long black hair were unmistakable. Lena. The words beneath. Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward. $50. Calder's jaw worked once, but his face betrayed nothing. He folded the notice and handed it back. "Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits and a cow that won't listen." Graham squinted, studying him. "She's not just a runaway, Mr. Wyatt. She's part of a violent group. That sign they left? They meant it. You see her, you send word." "I'll do that," Calder said evenly. The soldier lingered a beat longer, suspicion hard in his eyes. Then he mounted, spurred his horse, and disappeared into the heat shimmer. Inside the cabin, Lena stood just beyond the curtain, blanket tight around her shoulders. She had heard every word. Her gaze fixed on Calder when he entered, sharp and searching. "They came asking," he said quietly, setting his hat aside. "Showed me a paper, said you were wanted." She didn't speak. "I told them no." Her eyes narrowed, not quite trust. Not yet. But something shifted in the silence, a crack in the wall between them. That evening, the air felt strange, too still, like the desert was holding its breath. Calder sat sharpening his knife on the porch, each stroke of steel on stone steady as a heartbeat. Inside, Lena paced in slow circles, her steps quiet but restless, the wooden floor creaking beneath her weight. When the moon lifted over the ridge, she stepped outside. For the first time since he brought her here, she crossed the threshold on her own. Bare feet pressed the dust gingerly, testing the earth as if it might vanish beneath her. Calder paused, blade stilled in his hand, watching without a word. She moved toward the barn, blanket trailing behind her shoulders like a second skin. At a bare patch of dirt swept clean by the wind, she knelt and picked up a stick. With deliberate strokes, she carved a shape into the earth. A bird, wings stretched wide, flames curling around it like a crown. Calder rose and walked over slowly, boots crunching. He stopped a few feet behind her. "What's that?" he asked, voice low, respectful. Her eyes never left the drawing. For a long while, she said nothing. Then, in a voice cracked but steady, she answered, "Bird in fire, my people's sign." She tapped the center of the bird. "My father's sign, our family mark. We painted it on our tents, carved it into wood, always flying, always fire." Her hand trembled as she pressed the stick harder into the dirt. "Last spring, soldiers came. Said we must move to dry land, no food, no water. Said we were danger." Her voice faltered, but she pushed on. "We refused. We stayed. We fought. They burned. My mother, my brothers burned inside the tents." Calder's fists clenched at his sides, jaw tight. "I ran," she whispered. "They found me, beat me, tied me, called me thief, said I killed a settler's wife. I didn't. I never." Her voice cracked, fury breaking through. She turned suddenly, eyes blazing into his. "I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong." The words tore through the silence, echoing against the hills like thunder. For a moment, Calder couldn't speak. He saw her shoulders tense, bracing for disbelief, for rejection. But instead, his voice came low and certain. "I believe you." Her eyes widened, suspicion breaking just enough for the pain underneath to surface. She dropped the stick. Her hands fell into her lap, then to her face as her shoulders began to shake. At first, it was silent, but soon sobs spilled raw, deep, unstoppable. Calder didn't reach for her, didn't speak comfort he didn't have. He only crouched beside her, pressed his hand flat into the dirt beside the flaming bird. Not a touch, but a testimony, a promise. Her cries slowed. She lifted her head, dirt and tears streaking her face. Her lips parted in a whisper. "You can call me Lena." Calder gave a small nod, his voice rough as gravel. "Lena it is." The fire inside the cabin burned low, shadows climbing high on the wooden walls. Calder sat at the table, hands folded, his gaze distant. Across from him, Lena, still wrapped in the blanket, stared into the flames, her face streaked but calm now, as though the storm had passed, leaving only embers. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, waiting. Finally, Calder broke it. "You asked why I cut you down," he said, voice gravelly. "Maybe I should have told you sooner." Her eyes flicked toward him, guarded. "Last spring, raiders hit my ranch. Apache, they said. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'll never know." His jaw tightened. "I was out hunting, came back to ashes. My sister, she was 16, was still alive. I heard her crying in the barn." He paused, his throat working. "But I was scared. I didn't go in. Waited for help. By the time it came..." The silence filled the rest. Lena's hands gripped the edge of her blanket. Her gaze softened, not with pity, but with recognition. She knew the shape of that guilt too well. "You saved me," she said quietly, the words tasting strange on her tongue. "Because you couldn't save her." Calder met her eyes. There was no defense in his expression, no denial, only truth. He gave the smallest nod. She studied him, her voice sharper now. "If I had been white, would you still have pulled the knife?" The question struck hard, but Calder didn't flinch. He rose, walked slowly around the table, and stopped in front of her. His hand lifted, calloused fingers brushing her chin, tilting her face upward. His touch was careful, measured, trembling with restraint. "I don't love skin," he said, his voice low, rough. "I love what breathes under it." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell this time. She leaned slightly into his hand, her breath unsteady, as though the weight of years had shifted just enough for something new to take its place. Night settled heavy over the ranch, the kind of darkness that pressed close, broken only by the thin glow of a single lantern. Inside, the air was warm with firelight, and something quieter, an understanding that had not been there before. Lena sat at the table, her blanket draped loose now, shoulders bare beneath the flicker. Calder moved about the small kitchen, stirring beans, though both knew he wasn't hungry. His eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't watching. Hers did the same. At last, he set the spoon aside and leaned against the counter, arms folded, studying her in silence. The space between them pulsed like a taut rope. Lena's gaze shifted toward the window. Outside, the desert wind moaned against the shutters, carrying voices of things they couldn't change. She turned back, and for the first time her eyes met his without flinching. Calder took a step closer, then another. His boots were soft against the floor, but the sound filled the room like a drumbeat. When he stopped, he stood only inches away, his breath mingled with hers. Slowly, as if moving through water, she lifted her hand, touched his chest. Her fingers trembled against the fabric of his shirt, feeling the steady thrum of his heart. Calder's own hand rose, brushing a loose strand of her hair back behind her ear. His thumb lingered along her cheekbone, calloused but gentle. Neither spoke. Words would have only broken it. Then, as though drawn by the same current, they leaned forward. The kiss came quiet, hesitant at first, two scarred souls testing whether the world would allow them this small mercy. Then it deepened, fuller, richer, as if they had both been holding their breath for too long and only now remembered how to exhale. The lantern flickered, shadows swaying across the walls, like a dance neither of them had learned but somehow knew. Later, Calder stepped outside. In his hands, he carried the crude wooden sign he had torn from the cottonwood. The words, "White man don't forgive," still scrawled hateful and jagged. Without ceremony, he laid it in the fire pit, struck a match, and watched the flames devour it. Behind him, Lena stood in the doorway, her blanket wrapped close, her eyes bright with reflected fire. The desert had a way of carrying rumors faster than the wind. By the third day after the soldiers' visit, Calder saw dust on the horizon again. Not cavalry this time, but 3 riders in canvas coats and old hats, rifles strapped across their backs. He stood at the fence line, rifle resting casually against the porch post, though every muscle in him coiled tight. The lead rider spat into the dirt as he dismounted, a tin badge pinned to his chest that looked more self-made than earned. "Wyatt," the man called, voice slick with authority he hadn't earned. "Heard tell you might be harboring someone don't belong." Calder's jaw set. "You hear a lot of things, Joe. Don't make them true." Joe Prescott narrowed his eyes. "We're talking about a girl. Apache. Word is she's dangerous. There's a reward. $50. Cash money. And the thanks of every God-fearing man west of the Pecos." Calder didn't blink. "You come all this way for a rumor?" Prescott stepped closer, boots grinding into the dust. "We aim to check inside, just in case." Calder moved down from the porch slowly, each step deliberate. He stopped in front of Prescott, shoulders squared. "You got a warrant?" The men behind Prescott shifted in their saddles, hands brushing rifle stocks. The air went brittle, the kind that snapped easy. Prescott gave a short, humorless laugh. "You think this is a court, Wyatt? Don't need paper to sniff out savages." Calder's eyes stayed locked on his. "Ain't no girl here. Just me, ghosts and goats." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Prescott spat again, his lips curling. "If you're lying, You'll burn with her." He gave a sharp whistle, and the three men turned their horses, riding off in a churn of dust. Calder watched until they disappeared, then went inside. Lena stood near the window, her hand white-knuckled against the sill. She had heard everything. He met her gaze, steady, unflinching. That night, when the stars came out sharp and cold, Calder carried the hateful sign he had saved into the fire pit behind the barn. This time, Lena came too. She said nothing, only stepped close enough for her shoulder to brush his as the flames rose. For the first time, she whispered, "Thank you." The words were soft, but they landed like something sacred. The ranch felt different the next morning. The air was tight, the silence too heavy, as though the desert itself was listening. Calder had seen smoke on the horizon at dawn, steady, dark, too thick for a campfire. Word had spread. Prescott and his kind would be back, and next time they wouldn't ask questions. By midday, Calder was packing. Dry biscuits, jerky, a canteen, a box of cartridges. His movements were quick, practiced, the kind of preparation a man made when he didn't expect to come back. Lena stood by the fence line, wrapped in one of his old coats, her hair braided against the wind. She watched him, her eyes sharp, with questions she didn't ask. Finally, he looked up from tightening a saddle strap. "We have to go," he said simply. "Tonight." She didn't flinch. She only nodded, as though she had already known. "There's land south," Calder continued, his voice low. "Beyond the border. They say Apaches still live free in the Sierra Madres. Far from soldiers, far from signs." He paused, searching her face. "If we ride hard, we can make it." Lena stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint flush in her cheeks, the dust clinging to her lashes. She reached for his hand, held it firm. "You'll come with me?" Calder asked, his voice rougher than he meant it to be. For the first time since he'd cut her down, she pressed her forehead against his chest, her breath warm through his shirt, and in a voice patched, halting but clear, she whispered, "I want to live. I want to live as your wife." The words hit harder than any bullet. Calder closed his eyes, his hand trembling as it cupped the back of her head. By sundown, 2 horses were saddled. The door of the ranch swung quietly on its hinges as they left no fire, no farewell, just a home turned into memory. They rode under a silver moon, the ridges painted ghostly in its light. The desert stretched wide and endless, but neither spoke. They didn't need to. Every mile carried them closer to a place where love might be allowed to breathe. The desert opened wide into low scrub and stone cliffs, the moon throwing long shadows across the land. Calder rode with his rifle slung, and his eyes scanning the ridges. Every whisper of wind, every shifting shadow pulled at his gut. He had lived long enough under this sky to know when trouble was close. It came sudden. A crack split the night air. The horse beneath Calder jolted, and he felt the searing punch of lead tearing into his side. His breath hitched. He gritted his teeth, clutching his ribs as he slid half out of the saddle. "Calder!" Lena's voice broke raw against the emptiness. She swung down, rushing to him. Another shot rang out, ricocheting off stone. Dust spat into the air. Calder forced his body upright, pulling himself free from the stirrup before he hit the ground hard. Blood soaked his shirt fast, hot against the cold desert night. "Keep going," he rasped, trying to push her toward her horse. "No!" Her grip tightened on his arm, refusing. On the ridgeline above, 2 riders appeared, rifles glinting in the moonlight, shadows against silver, patient as wolves. Calder groaned, his strength faltering. "They'll run us down." "Then we run harder," Lena snapped, hooking her arm under his shoulder, dragging him toward the rocks ahead. Bullets sliced the night, sparking against stone. The horses spooked and bolted, but Lena didn't look back. Her body strained under his weight, her feet slipping in the dust, but she kept moving. Calder's boots dragged. Every step was fire in his side, his vision tunneling. Still, he forced his legs to move, his jaw clenched against the pain. Somehow, they reached a narrow gap between cliffs, a hidden pass twisting like a scar through the land. Lena pulled him into its shadow, pressed him against the cold stone. The riders' shots echoed behind them, but none followed into the narrow cut. Not yet. Calder collapsed to his knees, blood dripping into the dust. He looked up at her, his breath ragged, eyes clouded with both pain and something else. "You said you wanted to be my wife." His voice was broken, but sure. She knelt beside him, cupping his face with both hands. "I meant it." Even through the agony, his lips curved in the faintest smile. "Then we better make it through this pass." Lena pressed her forehead to his, her eyes closed, her breath trembling, and for the first time since she was strung to that cottonwood, she prayed not to soldiers' gods, but to the spirits of fire and wind. Because love here was a gamble, and tonight they were betting everything. The days that followed blurred into a haze of blood, fever, and whispered prayers. Calder lay propped on folded blankets inside a small hide tent they had stumbled upon by the river's bend. His breath came ragged at first, his skin pale, but little by little the fire inside him held. Lena, no. The woman who had been Lena never left his side. She kept the wound clean, changed the cloths, pressed water to his lips. Her hands were steady even when her heart was not. She spoke little, but her silence carried more than words. A vow she had not yet spoken aloud. One evening, the fever broke. Calder stirred, his eyes opening to the soft light of a lantern flickering against the hide walls. He turned his head, found her watching him, basin of cool water at her side. "You always this bossy with your patience?" he murmured, voice rough, but touched with a faint grin. She raised one brow, but a small smile played at her lips. "Only the ones too stubborn to die." Calder chuckled, then winced as the stitches in his side pulled. She hushed him gently, laying a palm against his chest. Their eyes lingered. The silence stretched, not heavy this time, but full. Finally, he whispered, "Tell me something true. Your real name." Her breath caught. She hesitated, then reached for his hand, guiding it to rest just over her heart. "Ayana," she said softly. "It means peaceful river. My father gave it to me." Calder closed his eyes for a moment, as though letting the name sink deep into him like water into stone. When he opened them again, his voice was warm, rough with meaning. "Ayana, you're the only peace I've ever known." She did not cry this time. She only held his hand tighter, her silence speaking the rest. Months passed, carrying them southward, away from the reach of soldiers and vigilantes, toward the borderlands, where the land softened into groves of mesquite and the river cut its slow path through the earth. There they built something small, something quiet. A lodge of pine and hide stood at the bend of the river, strong but humble, its walls smelling of sage and fresh earth. In its shade, Ayana Salvatierra sat cross-legged on a woven mat, a sash tied across her growing belly. Her hands moved with calm precision as she stitched a tiny shirt of white cotton, the kind made for a child not yet born. She hummed softly, a tune her mother once sang when the fire burned low. The sound lingered in the lodge like a prayer, carrying life where silence once dwelled. Outside, Calder worked a young mustang, patient and firm. His voice was low, steady, guiding the restless creature until it bent its head to his hand. Every so often, he looked toward the lodge, catching sight of Ayana's silhouette against the curtain. Each time, his mouth curved in a smile, quiet and unshakable. Their home bore no trophies, no portraits, no remnants of hate. Instead, bundles of herbs hung drying, 2 well-thumbed books lay on a shelf, and a half-finished blanket waited folded for the child. The walls held no ghosts, only the simple weight of survival turned into belonging. One evening, Ayana walked barefoot down to the river, the path worn soft by her steps. The current moved slow and certain, kissing her ankles as she waded into the shallows. She laid both hands over her belly and whispered, "Little one, your father did not just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise." Behind her, soft footsteps pressed the grass. Calder came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers without a word, their fingers entwined, warm and sure. Together, they watched the stars bloom one by one over the water, their reflections trembling on the surface like lanterns set afloat. No one in history would remember them. No monument would carry their names. Yet here, in the hush of the river's bend, they had carved a piece of peace from a land of scars. And like her name, the river kept flowing quiet, steady, endless. In the deserts of the West, where dust remembers blood and silence remembers cries, sometimes love still finds a way. Ayana and Calder's story was not written in law books, nor carved into stone. It was written in the hush of midnight rides, in the trembling of hands bound and then freed, in the quiet vow of two souls who refused to let hatred decide their fate. Where others saw enemies, they saw something sacred. Where others left curses nailed to trees, they left behind seeds of life and forgiveness. Their love was not easy, not safe, but it endured, and that made it stronger than bullets, stronger than fire, stronger than every word meant to destroy them. And maybe that's the truth of the West. Not the gunfights or the gold rushes, but the quiet bravery of people who chose love when everything around them demanded hate. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminded you that even in the harshest deserts, love can bloom like water from stone, then this is the place for you. Subscribe to my channel for more tales of forbidden romance, quiet courage, and love that refuses to die.